Before we begin, thank you guys so much for 1000 subscribers. For me, it's an incredible milestone and I'm very grateful. So, thank you again. I absolutely love the original Hello Neighbor. If you look at my channel, it may be obvious, but in case this is the first video you come across, yeah, Hello Neighbor is actually a great game with very deep story and fantastic characters. Not even one story to be exact, and not even one character. Today, in this video, I'm going through the many personalities and roles of Theodore Peterson, originally known as the Neighbor. Neighbor is obviously my favorite character, and I had to cut the sentence "I love this man so much" from the video because it was in the script like 5 times and it was becoming repetitive, but I feel like you will see in the direction the video goes that this is the case. I'm really fascinated by how he originally is written as a character. Most of his roles written by the original creator are very, very interesting, and he has a very complex character which maybe cannot be summed up as easily as another character for another franchise, but I will make an attempt. This man alone has gone through a ton of character changes. In the very beginning, Nikita, the actual creator of Hello Neighbor, has created this dude. He looked older than the current one, and then Elena, who created most of the concept arts and textures for Hello Neighbor, arrived and created us him.
Nice.
Already before the game's development, there were multiple ideas for his role in the plot, which actually never made it to even pre-alpha. The Neighbor, later named as Theodore Masters Peterson, was not Theodore Masters Peterson until the final release of the game. He was either Neighbor or Sosyed, which is the Russian word for neighbor. Even though in hide and seek he is a 47 years old man, we didn't know his age back then at all. I mean, it was confirmed like a year ago in a stream.
What is the neighbor's age? Does the neighbor have an age, or is it kind of just an approximation?
About the age. To be honest, I have like a document where I decided to like spread all the events in the game with like proper dates. If I'm not mistaken, the neighbor is, I guess he's around 50s when in the hide and seek game, so it's about like 47 or something like that, or like 50 something. So I have a document and I will I will share this information if it's like really fun to share, but I think he's like 47 or something.
47-ish?
Yep.
Alright.
I was gonna say,
yeah,
for a guy in his 50s, he can move. He can really move.
Well, he do a lot of stretches and like running.
A lot of running
in the first game, yeah. So
he strikes me as the kind of guy who like used to have like a morning run routine.
Neighbor in the beginning was a quite addicted character with a pinch of sassiness and a lot of charisma. This sassiness luckily carries on to this day in media which knows how to handle this character. He was addicted to watching TV and drinking milk and of course protecting his basement. Thanks to the AI and the broken facial animations, he seemed to be quite emotionlessly chasing the player until he got tired of this hunter-prey game and simply digged them alive. The game had its charming vibe with good amount of humor that really made it special. He wasn't only smart and actually a quick villain, he was also genius. Later on this was expanded. This man was savage and totally uncontrollable, both AI and character-wise. More than often he ended up doing absolutely unexpected things, surprising everybody. To this day, pre-alpha and alpha 1 still can surprise me because the neighbor always acts differently during the gameplay. In the early alphas, being a bachelor, he lived by his own rules, enjoying life. He was minding his own business and didn't interrupt his surroundings until you didn't interrupt his. And when the player interrupted him, which is actually the point of the game, then he pretty much fought back and he showed who is the alpha male. It is also worth mentioning that the neighbor was originally cursing like hell, which can be heard in the prototype video as well. Just as the voice lines are literally in the old builds. Many people assume that he was in his 30s or something like that because of this, with me included, because for me personally he doesn't look older than 35 still. And since the early alphas were heavily based on Faust, people begin to suspect things. Not to put the neighbor on the supernatural level, but there were theories that despite he looks like the main villain of the game, even though the player is the one who is addicted to a closed door in his house, there is much more going on in the background. In Alpha 2, we find the neighbor aggressively chasing down someone who turns out to be his child. He shows a quite impatient face towards the player, who I will call player 4 now because Nicky was nowhere during this time. But still, player wants to investigate the house and get to the basement which neighbor just closed down. I will later make a video about the Hello Neighbor maps and build because they are absolutely worth talking about, but for now let it be enough. The neighbor threw the player out of the house despite they both live in it. Seemingly Alpha 2 didn't show us too much story-wise, but actually it did. It shows that there's no mother figure in the picture, and we begin to suspect a thing that later becomes almost obvious. Alpha 3 was a turning point. The neighbor's AI is nearly unbearable and the game is basically pitch black at most places, which can be solved by giving up on playing on ultra settings like everybody did. But PC gang, rise up please in the comments. The neighbor is actually aggressive, fast and vulnerable. The ending cutscene reveals that there is something very deep going on in the background, and the neighbor isn't the main villain of the game anymore. The player doesn't know yet what is actually going on, but from this moment, things quickly progressed further. And from Alpha 4, the story began to reveal. Neighbor once again was shown crying on the windmill in the opening cutscene, and yes, that's a crying animation. He wasn't the strongest anymore, but only mentally. He is still one who is in control, and he will throw the player out of the house mercilessly, but it becomes crystal clear that they do not hate each other. Neighbor and player's relationship received a few hints as well. Later it was revealed that player is in fact his son, who has traumatic memories about his father, thinking about him as a negative memory, but not actually hating him. It is only the two of them in the house and nobody else, and player is trying to rewind some bad memory. The neighbor in general barely allows us to progress in the house, and especially later in the basement. The story comes to its peak in Beta 3 before it gets entirely scrapped for the final game, with neighbor truly being horrible at communication, and he himself is trying to oppress traumatic memories from his very own childhood. Player fights his own fight, but his story is actually tied together with the neighbors, and this is why this storyline is my favorite. It is not just two people fighting their own inner fights inside a family, then meet halfway. It is actually player trying to reveal why the neighbor behaved the way he did towards him, angry and overall very negative, despite he was just a little child. The neighbor never admits if he needs help, not even later, because he's still going by his own rules and attempts to go on with his life as if nothing has happened, despite he is unable to in the end, and he is non-stop getting attacked by fear itself. And while he cannot defeat fear itself, the player can, and he is the one who ends up protecting and freeing them against it. in the supposedly final fight after beating the giant neighbor, who still didn't directly attack the player, but he received quite a few hits and ended up allowing the player to progress. Player protects the kid neighbor from the thing. By winning, he overcomes his own traumatic memories, his inner fights, and also frees the neighbor's soul so he can finally rest. The man thanks it with a smile and a wave and goes through the door, finally finding peace. Player overcomes his probably ruined childhood, forgives his dad, and progresses towards the cemetery in the present, where his parents probably rest. And you would say the generational trauma topic is milled left and right. But mind you, this storyline was already a thing in 2017, way before Disney or other companies picked the idea up. Redemption was always very important in this franchise, as well as the characters being both good and bad and not just one-sided, both the neighbor and the player. And even though it was the strongest in this storyline, it kind of sneaked its way to the final game as well, with Nicky being able to imagine himself to the neighbor's situation, forgive and actually move on, but he couldn't help him anymore, only assume how the man's life ended. Neighbor in general was a very self-ruled, strong man who was secretly afraid and wounded by his past. He couldn't be a good dad because he had no good example on how to be one. Player didn't want to become like him, and with his coping, he ended up changing a seemingly never-ending cycle in their family. Something about apples and trees, you know. It is worth mentioning that already during this time, the man was already inventing stuff and actually expanding the house like crazy. Neighbor is typically the dude who can fix literally anything, even if the solutions are a bit crazy. The dude made a robotic shark, a magnet, and expanded the house with a metro, whether it was really there or not. The final release of Hello Neighbor brought us a new storyline once again, showing that the neighbor had a new family, 2 kids and a wife. Nicky's point of view is absolutely reliable. Already as a child, he sees the man crying and struggling, but he stubbornly wants to help someone in the basement, thinking that the neighbor keeps them as hostage. He does see the man struggling and most likely feels him a bit, since later he turns out to be a very introverted person as well, but they don't know each other at all. After being put back on his porch multiple times, yet stubbornly trying, Nicky gets into the basement, where neighbor finds and catches him. And I would say yes, he's very much forced to close the key to the basement. And while people are saying everything about such action, neither of them gave me a valid explanation on what would they do if they were in the man's situation. I would say we must not forget that this man is actually an average father in a horrible life situation, driven by fear and reckless sudden decisions to protect what he has left. He is not a kidnapper and not a murderer. He is a man in despair. But for the future, I don't think he would give in and allow himself to be controlled. Hide and Seek perfectly shows how happy him and his family was before the accident, how average family they were, how high this man has fallen from. He in fact depends on his family very much when it comes to personality, despite he was a loner in the early storyline. Now it screams how much he wants to be around his loved ones and how he admires them. Everybody loves everybody in this family, and it screams. He may be a strict dad with a very strong presence, but his kids love him and it shows. Hello Neighbor is actually very realistic because it shows that tragedies can happen to an average family even. After the car accident with the wife dying, Theodore falls into the deepest pit of depression and grief. He is absolutely unable to take care of himself, let alone his surroundings, and the game accurately shows this fact, staring in front of himself while some kind of murderous stuff is going on in the TV, staying in total darkness, most likely not eating at all. What happens with her daughter is was an absolute accident, and while he doesn't blame his son for it and actually wants to protect him at all costs, that's why he hides him in the basement, Aaron thinks he is being punished since there's zero amount of communication between them. Theodore was always horrible at communication already in the previous storylines, and now this reaches its peak. While he's trying to carry on with life, despite being in the deepest grief ever, and probably just wanting to lay down and die, he has to deal with his son actively working against his actions as well, and a random kid breaking in stubbornly, and suddenly the entire town is also interested in him as a person in Hello Neighbor 2. But him and Aaron have their struggles separately. Aaron has his own fears, and he would actually betray his father if it meant to escape from these fears, and Neighbor has his own fears as well, and their paths never meet, unlike back then with the player. Please put a hashtag playerbestson in the comments. There is a side plot where it becomes obvious that the neighbor is perfectly aware of that he's inside the game, that he's an AI, and he nonstop wants to escape from this repeating simulation because he's had enough. This dates back as far as the alphas. He keeps leaving messages throughout the builds in the form of QR and binary codes, and in the final release of Hello Neighbor, the error word appears and gives a chance for a player to erase the neighbor from the game. This is just excellent fourth wall breaking. It shows that despite they both play roles, both Nicky and Theodore, the neighbor sees the player as an ally. He trusts him enough to involve him into his problems and asks him to escape from the game because he's had enough, and very rightfully so. And before you ask, yes, it's canon at the moment I'm saying this, even if it gets retconned with the existence of Hello Neighbor 2 and legit everything that came after Hello Neighbor. I will always prefer the original writing by the original creator because, in my opinion, no one knows the characters better than the person who originally created them. Also, before getting to Hello Neighbor 2, I want to briefly mention how much it shows that Theodore is a genius in Hello Guest and the alpha versions of Hello Neighbor 2. Like, he fixes up a funicular all by himself in a guest suit, in which experience you cannot see in. He uses chloroform to make people faint, and he simply just knocks down a man in a hat, still in the guest suit. You can tell he's very determined and he will do anything to get to his goal, whatever it was. And also, not to mention, he just casually built bombs and made an entire building explode. Like, alright. The Hello Neighbor 2 alphas show that he could beat up anybody, and he is absolutely pissed. If he wanted to, he could just murder the entire cast around him. And honestly, I don't blame him if he did so. Just remember these images because they will be important later. There's so much potential to this character. There's so many great ways and directions to take him towards. Neighbor is just something else. He isn't a character who has a sample that you can feel, like in the case of most characters. He isn't just a character with a tragic past, or he isn't just someone who has a chance to become a villain and be evil. He is much, much more. He is being tortured all the time now. He loved his wife so much. He even removed the car seat where she sat at, and this is one of the symbolic things that I really like in the original Hello Neighbor. Like, if I had to run for shelter to someone in Ravenbrooks, I think I would go to the neighbor because I know that he has a good soul and in general, he is a good man. Despite towards the public, he may look very threatening, and at first glance, he looks evil, but he is not evil. And this man is like an eagle. He spotted you through the walls in the early builds, and he hears you doing stuff in your own house and gets mad at it sometimes. It's just so funny. Okay, so for me, Hello Neighbor 2 is the one which we count from the beta, the demo, and the final release of the game. And Hello Neighbor 2 is thin ice. At the moment I'm saying this sentence, the story is unfinished and they already keep touching the existing story elements, some of them off screen and some of them on screen, so you can also see them in the cutscenes. Not to mention other threats that may or may not retcon things, which Hello Neighbor's original creators established already. In this game, the man is just angry. And that's it. I mean, his anger is still very justified, but if you look at the promotional renders, he's either raising his shovel or he's just angry or both. And that's it. He can also lift up a grown chubby man with one hand easily. Like, seriously, he could still murder the entire town in no time if he wanted to. They are no match for his powers, like seriously. Quentin could die already during the first cutscene, but the neighbor doesn't want to directly hurt anybody. And do not forget, the base plot is that a random journalist guy wants to kidnap a kid he just met and barely knows from his father. Theodore is already having a very hard time keeping his very own son in one place, in the hideout they just escaped to, because Aaron can lockpick every existing door on the planet, and I would be insanely pissed as well if a random journalist just kept showing up at my hideout, wanting to expose me, especially if it was a man who looks like this, and most likely is very good friends with Funny Mushrooms. I'm kind of skipping over Secret Neighbor because not only it is supposed to be a spin-off game, but also it is entirely from the perspective of a bunch of kids who are not reliable enough.
The whole concept of this game is just all in a child's imagination.
They should touch grass, actually, instead of planning to break into a man's house and murder him, because supposedly they want to save whoever is in the basement currently, I don't know. The description keeps changing, so we don't know anymore. The rocket event in Secret Neighbor confirms that gameplay-wise, the game actually doesn't happen at all, and the house is the Act 1 house, as seen in the lobby. Also, Otto and Quentin are with the kids now. Yeah, the guest also exists, so yeah. The only thing which Secret Neighbor can confirm is that the neighbor loves cosplaying. Hello Engineer is a spin-off to me and will stay one. Magically and mysteriously, the kids and the neighbor's path once again crosses. I wonder what kind of coincidence is this, or how small is this town actually? Especially knowing the fact that in this game, the kids illegally trespass and get inside an old, rusty and dangerous abandoned amusement park to get pieces for their cars for a competition. Can they just not steal stuff? Then whether Theodore is actually in the park or not, I'm not sure anymore. They just keep stopping him from doing whatever he's doing, like he's unleashing his mecha inventions and doing some interesting stuff, for sure. And the kids picture him as a dumb while all of us know that Neighbor in reality is an inventor genius who can build and fix anything. So basically, the plot is just Tom and Jerry and you build cars. And whatever else is happening, like, you know, it's, for me, it's just not Hello Neighbor at all when it comes to story and characters. Theodore is damn out of character and he's angry all the time, but at least we got this model. Oh, and Nicky's diaries exist, I guess. You know, it's based on the books, which I will mention later, and the books are not relevant anymore according to TinyBuild. It is a game about Nicky being way too addicted to his neighbor. Oh, and also the VR game exists. This is once again from the unreliable kid's perspective who should still touch grass. And neighbor is actually stranger than in the most out of character fanfiction I have ever read, and trust me, I did read almost all of the fanfictions out there. You know, we already saw him slaughtering the guest in the alphas of Hello Neighbor 2. Him being afraid of him suddenly, out of the blue, just makes zero sense. It's just for the sake of the boo, scary demon guest, new villain, possession plot. And that's why I'm extremely mad, because they butchered and sacrificed everything else for the sake of this new plot. And I don't care if a guest is a demon or a local librarian or the milkman. He goes against this man with a personality that I described before. And it is also very illogical that the neighbor kidnaps all of the kids after each other. He would just truly kick their ass out if he saw them in the house, like he did with Nicky. And to be honest, I don't even know what's happening in this game at all. Like, it would just make things worse. The whole plot of the VR game feels like an additional filler that nobody asked for and which doesn't fit the main plot at all. In the books, the neighbor has 5 sentences. Yes, 5 sentences in 7 books, and I'm not joking. He is the main character of the franchise, and yet he has almost 0 screen time. And by screen time, I mean actually screen time which is based around his character. I know that these books are from the kid's perspective, but the man is still the main character. They made him crazy in the books, yeah, despite it was not once confirmed that the neighbor is absolutely sane, smart, and aware of his actions in the games. And even the books show that if he is not a crazy person, and he is written correctly, he is such a gigachat character. I mean, he legit recreates some ancient machine from a single blueprint, which is powered by a Chaos Emerald, I guess. But he is not insane originally. This whole crazy subplot feels like a writer's excuse, since if you write a crazy character, he can do the most insane shit and you don't have to explain his actions at all. Because he's crazy. And oh boy, it does happen quite a few times. Not to mention that not once the book itself entirely forgets that Theodore is in fact insane. Other than this, I'm saying a few examples about the few scenes in which the focus tries to be on the neighbor but ends up not being on him. For example, in the second trilogy, which is books 4 to 6, in the end he begs to his family to not go to the amusement park opening ceremony because it might be dangerous. He legit begs them and they ignore him. Neighbor never begs. He never begged to anyone, and he begs in the books and people are like, oh, it's okay, let's do what we planned anyway, let's not listen to him. I mean, imagine being the head of the family and all of your relatives just think that you are weird and crazy, and they basically dislike you despite you are living in the same house with them. And you cannot ask help from any of them even if you wanted to, because apparently he has a big family. He has a sister and other relatives outside of his wife and kids, and legit none of these people around him help this man. They actively try to avoid him as a person. So he has no chance to get therapy or any kind of professional doctor who could help his worsening state. People just point out that his state is worsening and that's it. Everybody is totally fine with it, and actually they are the ones who are suffering. There's also a plot for the books only, where neighbor is actually a child from Ravenbrooks and he grows up in the town, then later he moves out. He has a friend who he explores the Mayak with, and his parents, who are involved with some cultists or whatever, they built the Mayak and they made observations and found something that shouldn't get into the hands of said cultists. So that's the base plot. For Neighbor's childhood, personality is not known, it's just that they love to explore this old building where his parents used to work. So this man is being threatened by the mayor, who requests the amusement park in Ravenbrooks to be built. Neighbor is forced to build the attractions unsafe and too big, which obviously will fail, and he knows this. And the failure in the end of the day is blamed on him, despite he not once points out that this just won't work out. But the mayor, who turns out to be a villain later, doesn't care and ends up blaming everything on him publicly, despite there's a ton of people building and testing these attractions. Everything is just ends up being the neighbor's fault, who already pointed out that the attraction itself is dangerous. Actually, I should make a video about the books too, because there's a lot to say here. Theodore also has a best friend named Ike Gershowitz, later Ike Quentin Cornelius Gershowitz. He will come up very often in my videos. He is the man who probably knows him more than his very own wife. They are friends since childhood, and the bad side of this whole thing is that Ike is later entirely evaporating from the plot altogether. Earlier mentioned wife is running by the name Diane. To this day, I deny that the game and book Diane is the same person. The book one always cry quits whenever this man is not straight up answering her questions, her very heavy questions, to be honest. And the actual question I have to ask here, as a person who is probably Diane's age, why the hell are they still together in the books? Like, seriously, it is anything but marriage. She is non-stop just roasting his husband. She isn't offering him emotional help at all. She's just marking him as a crazy person who needs to be avoided and who might be actually dangerous for the children. And the kids do the same, even though Mia used to like Neighbor, and Aaron, I think he also used to like Neighbor, but they also just end up calling him a crazy man, and every single time they meet in the house, they just describe that how weird their dad is. Congratulations. But before I get attacked for on the books, I actually really liked a few scenes. And actually, I do not care, because in the beginning of the video, I stated that I love the original Hello Neighbor, and the books are not part of the original Hello Neighbor. But to close this section with a more positive tone, I really liked the third book's ending, with the neighbor actually seriously building an entire amusement park in his very own basement for the kids. And it is also hinted previously that he isn't different from Nicky. Like, they end up doing very similar things when it comes to fate and behavior. And also book 3 reveals that Aaron is in fact the actual puppet master, and he is the one in control and not the neighbor. And Nicky discovers this fact. In the 6th book, where everybody forgets that Theodore is crazy, he basically tells Aaron that they were on the same side all along in the trilogy, so he should stop digging his grave as his very own son. Theodore is part of an anti-cultist secret organization, because that also exists, with a few people and friends, and the kids should stop, like, actively acting against them. And also Theodore single-handedly defeats the cultist in an epic fight. So even in the books, the core of his personality sometimes shows when he is not written as a crazy man, but sadly most of the time he is. Best I can say is Theodore most likely had a very unexplored personality in the books, but he still doesn't directly harm anybody. And even though he tries to be a strict dad, I would say that the neighbor in the books is just very sad and silent and very lonely. There were multiple chances to show him as a character, but actually, my bad, explaining how food was served on plates is more important plot-wise in the books than showing, for example, how Theodore grieves over the fact that his best and only friend died. I don't handle the comics as. I mean, it's comics for a game franchise, so they exist, I guess. In the first comic, which is the better one story wise, Theodore literally builds a shrine for a random dead kid who died on his amusement park attraction, strengthens his hate for kids and teenagers altogether, very rightfully so, and climbs out from a collapsed building. And the second comic would end up in trash, but it cost me too much money. And I actually really like the art style, but story-wise I'm more interested why the graphic artist had to draw Smith. We were also robbed, like, look at how Neighbor originally looked. The main plot makes no sense at all, and it is very shady and not clearly understandable. Like, he is planning to flood the town for some reason, and he wants to make everybody suffer, which is just against the thing that I earlier said about the original neighbor, that he doesn't care about his surroundings and the people around him unless they interrupt him. And after wanting to flood the town, there's two girls, teenagers, who tell him not to. And then he says, okay. And then one of the girls just sends him to his death. And that's it. Then something happens and he becomes the guest and he wants to kill the girls. But the ghost dog of the girls actually saves them, and a happy ending, I guess. And the neighbor is, or the guest, or the person, whoever, like, walking away, like exactly like in the first comic. Like, he's not dead. Okay, all right, I get it. He's the main character, of course he's not dead. Like, I see the plot they are going for, but that's just a plot which isn't Hello Neighbor. It's just a plot out of character which they are trying to pull on Hello Neighbor with all of these evil. Venom is possessing a person and he has powers and he's evil and boo, and I don't know, just magic creature and cultists and everything. Like, that's the actual reason why I'm seemingly roasting everything else other than the original Hello Neighbor, which the original creator has written the plot of, because after a while, like after Secret Neighbor, the direction which the game goes to is this cultist fantasy mystery stuff with eerie vibes, and not the actual real spirit of Hello Neighbor, which was a realistic story about a family tragedy. I will personally say that it was the guest all along, because Theodore is very out of character. Also, the guest in this plot, actually, I want the silly, dangerous, golden apple addicted bird bag who trips in a piece of grass and ragdolls. And most importantly, I do not want to see my favorite character being tortured nonstop. And I will make a separate video about the cartoons, so I am leaving it. As closing thoughts, I think you guys saw well, while I could perfectly sum up and go into details about the neighbor's insanely rich yet simple character in the original games. After these, we hit a quite rocky road. The plot in the modern era more than once butchers the characters and a lot of other things for the sake of well, the plot. And while it is incredibly hard to write someone like Theodore in character, it is actually not impossible. Personally, I will just keep loving the original neighbor the way his creator intended. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please consider supporting me, it will mean a lot. You can buy me a coffee or you can become a channel member and you get access to exclusive stuff and my upcoming videos way earlier than others. Or if you can't, you can still check out my social media linked in the description. I post Hello Neighbor related stuff mostly. Thanks again and see you next time.